Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining us for this week's edition of the SMIE Consulting Midweek Roundup. It's Wednesday, November 17th, 2021, and I'm your host, Marty Bennett. And over the next half hour, we're going to be answering 3 questions we've been hearing from international educators over the last few days. It's International Education Week in the United States, and we're going to be celebrating that as we always do with a roundup of some of those news stories. We won't cover them more in depth this week. We'll save that for the newsletter that'll come out on Monday. But just a quick heads up, we will be taking a break from the roundup next Wednesday, day before Thanksgiving on the 24th. But we'll return to you on Wednesday, December 1st for our next roundup after this week. So let's get right to it. The beginning of International Education Week is always greeted with the Open Doors release. And this is always a special day in international education because it's the coming together of both, typically, and it had been in the past, coming together of both in-person advocates of international education in the DC area and with members of both the international ed space as well as the U.S. government in education, and typically State Department being involved in releases of the data that's compiled by IIE in conjunction with U.S. higher education institutions that enroll international students at the post-secondary level. So this release, like the last couple, was done virtually due to COVID, and was done from D.C., and Alan Goodman and his team were able to share some of the data from Open Doors, which is, as we all know who've been in international education for more than a minute, it's a look at the previous year's data, which, given what we all experienced in 2019, 2020, was a complete train wreck. And that's the data that was presented last week, or this week on Monday. And it showed a 15% decline in the total number of international students, and the first time our total number of international students was below 1 million since 2014-15, and a total that actually of 914,000 international students we haven't seen that low a number since 2013-14. So it's been some time, 7 years since we were below 1 million, and 8 years since we had anything lower than the number that have had this past year. But we knew it was a train wreck going in. We knew international students were not able to come or return even to campus. What is new? This data, and they did make this a point in last year's report and this year's report as well, is that it tracked international students who were physically in the United States at their university campuses studying. It tracked students that were studying remotely but within the United States, and those also tracked students who were studying remotely from their home countries. So all 3 of those categories came into play in regards to the data that's presented here, because frankly, those students that were studying remotely back in their home country made up a significant chunk of the international students that had gone home over the summer perhaps, or when the pandemic first struck, and have not been able to return, or decided to, in this past year's data from 2019-20, that was, those students were not able to get back into the country until perhaps this fall. So we'll see what that means, and the data that we knew was going to be coming was not certainly any positive news that we could have hoped for from the Open Doors data. Now, one thing it's always good to take a look back and get a very broad perspective on a wide variety of factors. Some of the things some of the data points that came out of this survey from Open Doors, they revealed some of the current international student data, revealed that 54% of all international students are currently STEM fields. So how important that is in terms of the data and recruitment strategies. It talked about some of the percentage of new international students, or the new international student enrollments from last year were not as significant as we had hoped. But we knew that those numbers were going to be down. The IIE snapshot from last year was predicting 43% down. They were actually 48% or 46% down, so very close in numbers. So very good predictive data, I think, for next year's Open Doors data, because we're looking at Open Doors as it is, shared that, and you can just look at the top 20 students on the Fast Facts report, and I always encourage you to download that Fast Facts from Open Doors and have that hanging up somewhere in your office. But looking at the data from last year, all of the top 25 destination countries to the United States reported decreases. No one was in positive territory last year. That's just a simple fact. And when you have that significant a drop off in your enrolled students or international students' ability to enroll, you certainly see that very clearly. But one thing that does give me hope, and I always like to focus on the positives here, is looking forward. I'm a historian, so I always appreciate understanding where we've come from, and we've never had drop-offs like this. These were historic last year in terms of the volume and the magnitude of the percentage of students that we lost or that we did not have in the United States last year. So the bulk of that are new internationals that couldn't enroll in fall 2020. And maybe had to start online, but haven't yet been able to come in country to establish their status. So what we're going to look at is the positives, and there are positives that came out of the Open Doors presentation, and they're coming from, that positivity is coming from the bounce back that we did experience in new international enrollments this fall. Everyone was expecting it because it was going to be basically 2 years of students that were able to potentially enroll. There are still visa issues out there, delays and trouble getting appointments, and that's really delayed a lot of the backup that consulates in high demand countries have experienced trying to get them all through into classes for the fall. We may see an additional bounce in the spring, but that's not tracked for the Open Doors data, obviously. But this fall snapshot survey, and this surveyed, I think they had 800 institutions this fall that were part of this survey, and wanting to share some of that data with you, because I think that's something that's going to give you a little bit more hope. Because when we see the data from the fall snapshot survey, that's going to tell us with pretty good reliability what the fall 2022 Open Doors report will look like, and it'll certainly be a bounce back for sure. But how big, we don't know yet. But this fall snapshot from 2021 from IIE had 864 higher ed institutions reporting. And they represent, I think it was close to, let me see, I think it was over 60% or around 60% of the total international students that are enrolled in the United States or attending these 860 odd institutions. So that gives us good predictive data for what Open Doors next year will look like. They have a number of significant data points here. The snapshot shows that overall enrollments saw a 4% increase as opposed to the 15% decrease from Open Doors this fall that showed last year's data, again, 2019-20. So that's interesting to see, or 2020-21, excuse me. So that data is going to be predicting to show a bounce back. So this is 4% overall. What is even more interesting to see, we'll get to this in a minute, is that the new international student enrollments bounced back 68% increase over last year. And last year there was a 43% predicted decrease in the similar snapshot from 2020. So bounce back over and above from 43 down to 68 up percent. So that's giving us an from this Open Doors data how they're confirming it. They're saying they're predicting a 4% increase in the Open Doors data for 21-22 that we're currently in, that institutions will be reporting on in early spring. So there's some great data that came out of the fall snapshot survey. One of the things that I want to focus on with you is some of the new, in terms of the numbers, and the reason why we got to that 68% for new international students enrollments up from fall 2020 to 21 is in the survey, 70% of institutions reporting said they either had a slight or substantial increase. And substantial was actually the lion's share. 40% of all institutions who were surveyed said they had a substantial increase in new international student enrollments. And that should be expected because, frankly, when you had very few able to get visas in time to come last fall compared to what students were able to get through this year, you should have seen a substantial increase. But 70% overall saw a slight to substantial increase, so that's great. And only 8% saw a substantial decrease, 12% slight decrease. So 10% saying they stayed the same. But one of the things that I think is particularly useful in terms of what the survey results showed is some of the support that U.S. colleges and universities have expanded in the course of the pandemic. That when we've talked regularly on the Roundup here about the need to provide levels of service for your students to meet needs where they are at that time. And then as a result of you making these efforts, these are things that you should be turning around and sharing with your prospective students and letting your current students share those with prospective students, because these are the things that matter in times of uncertainty, in times of global pandemics, when decisions are not as straightforward as they used to be in terms of, well, here's the institution, here's what it costs, here's what it's ranked, this is what's most important. I can get a visa, I can come. This year, last 2 years, it's been a very different set of concerns that prospective students and their parents have been grappling with. So how you are responding to those legitimate concerns that your prospective student parents and their audiences and sons and daughters have related to your institution and how you're telling those stories matters. And that the simple fact that you are telling those stories is something you should be focusing on at this point. So the fall 2020 numbers show that next fall should be a positive one, probably up 4%, which is overall, but certainly up 68% this fall in new international enrollments, which is very positive. Now, related to these issues, that translates nicely into our second question of the day. What are you focusing on in your communication with prospects? Is institutions were surveyed and 75% were spending more time on mental health support and services for international students. 74% were saying that electronic signatures on documentation for student status visa questions, since that was just approved this past month. Academic support for international students in their online classes was at 63%. Support for international students on health, safety, and other well-being issues, that was at 64%. So these are the concerns that institutions were focusing on in the past year, perhaps more than they ordinarily would have. And so I think this is something that are moments that if you've done it well and you have current students that can share their experiences going through this very turbulent year, almost 2 years of activity, sharing that with your prospective students, having the students do it, having you do it, having that repeated message that you care for your students and demonstrating that in real concrete ways, and having your best advocates, your current students, the ones who've been living it for the last 20 months, share why your institution is doing that well. So that is an absolute must that I think institutions should be communicating to their prospective students, especially during the pandemic. One thing I've found, and when we look to some of the data about what where students or universities are prioritizing their recruitment efforts, you see they did a survey in the fall snapshot of what countries institutions are prioritizing. You see India, China at the top of the list, India above China, so perhaps a shift in focus away from China. to India. You see third on that list, international students enrolling in U.S. high schools, and fantastic. Thank goodness, low-hanging fruit. It's right there. Vietnam is fourth on the list at 43%. 36% of U.S. institutions were actively recruiting international students at U.S. community colleges. So again, low-hanging fruit right there. Brazil, South Korea, Japan, Mexico, and Nigeria were the other countries that rounded out the top 10. So certainly some interesting data there in terms of what countries are high up on the radar of institutions to recruit in. Also, how they're doing that is important, and what they're focusing on in communicating. 64%, most significant piece of resources that universities have been leveraging to recruit international students has been current international students. So this is something that must be a part of your communication strategy. Doing online recruitment events has been a given for the last year and continues on into this year, where 56% of you are doing that, making online recruitment events a part of your strategy. 55% right after online recruitment are relying on social media outreach, and that's increasingly becoming a part of why you do what you do, or how you do what you do internationally to keep in touch with your students. 51% of you are expanding international partnerships. That's great, because those are the opportunities that can build on your current institutional connections, to develop those program links, to develop pipelines of students that can be fairly reliable over the years. 48% are equally using agents and Education USA in your recruitment efforts. So that's encouraging to see a very broad mix of strategies, and I think that's a healthy mix of how international students can and should be recruited through a variety of means, because not every student gets their information the same way, but there are messages that you can communicate effectively across all those media. Whether it's through your current students in online chats or video messages or emails that you send out, through the events that you do, having opportunities for current students to connect with prospective students, through social media campaigns that you do, videos, testimonials that takeover events on Instagram by your international students sharing what they've learned during the pandemic at your institution. All of these things are absolutely vital and must be leveraged if you're going to be truly successful on multi-levels, multi-platforms, and on multiple issues that are relevant for the students that are looking to you and to your current students for answers about how you will treat them as if and when they decide to come to your institution. So some great data in the snapshot survey. Certainly I find much more value in that for predictive data for the future and in terms of where the trends are, that type of thing. So you see a lot of positives coming out there in terms of the communicative value of the data and what should be priorities for your institution. And I want to make this point clearly. When I've worked with a number of institutions recently in the last 3 years, that when we get talking about communication plans, it seems to be that most institutions have a very process-focused plan for how they communicate with prospective students. You'll get your initial, if they do name buys, they'll send initial inquiries, initial messages out saying encourage them to consider their institution. For the inquiries that are in their system, they'll encourage them to apply. For the applicants, they'll encourage them to complete. For the completed, they'll encourage them to deposit. For the deposit, they'll be focusing on enrollment issues. Very few actively bake into their communication plans the kinds of questions that we're talking about here, the issues that prospective students want to hear about your institution. You may say you value diversity at your institution. You may say you have strong support services for international students. You may say you have top programs from across the campus that international students can discuss. You may say that there are there's quality instruction at the top levels that you get access to research and all that. Where's the evidence of that in your comm plan? You may have these top line values for your institution of accessibility, of diversity, of financial affordability, other things like that. Those are top level things, but if they're only ever getting that message once at the beginning of the process, but what happens if they've decided to apply? Are they never hearing the messages about how accessible your faculty are, how cared for international students are on campus, how international alumni are particularly strong in helping future students get connected to the institution? Are you capturing those core messages that are things that prospective students want to hear about? Things like we've just talked about during a pandemic. How did your campus respond? Are you addressing that at all in your communication to future students? Because if you're not, that's a missed opportunity. Do you think prospective students think everything's rosy and it's going to be normal for them if they come to your campus next fall? Is it something that they should just expect? Do you think they're not the least bit curious as to how things have been going with your current students? They want to know. They want to hear from them. They want to see what it's going to be like for them, even at the worst of times during the middle of a global pandemic. They want to see how you responded as an institution. And those are some great stories if you can capture them and communicate them back to your future students. It requires some effort. Goodness knows, you can't, the process emails that come, everybody has to have those. But if you don't have anything else that's selling your institution, selling your country, selling the advantages of why students should come to your institution throughout the process, you're missing out, and you're just going through the motions, frankly, with these process emails. That focusing on being responsive to things that students want to know about. How do you get that information? You pay attention to things here like the Roundup, where we cover a lot of these prospective student surveys, what they're after. You can get very granular with some of these folks, like IDP, IDP Connect. They have their IQ on-demand tracker, where you can get basically real-time data from students in certain markets on what some of the most important issues are for them. That's something that you should be leveraging as you communicate to your future students. So these student surveys are out there. You're going to hear every once in a while through these, like this yearly fall snapshot survey, you're going to see how other institutions have responded and what issues they have focused more on. I wonder, though, for that list of topics and how institutions are focusing on those, that they've actually done that on their campus this past year. I wonder how many of them are actually turning that around and communicating that to future students and laying out all the levels of support your institution has provided. And enhanced support that your institution has provided during some of the most traumatic months in higher education that our country's ever experienced outside of wartime. And so there's some things going on here that are very, very real that have impacts, global events having impacts on how we should operate. There are very real prohibitions on students coming in last year because they couldn't get visas in time. No consulates were open. This year, more students were able to get visas. We've seen numbers in China and India that the number of visas issued this past summer is above pre-pandemic levels. So those are very positive signs for where we're getting back to. The challenge is making that a global thing and being able to capitalize on those with future students in terms of how your office handles their concerns, both spoken and unspoken. Because typically a parent, a student, if they have a question that's hot on their mind, they're going to be upfront and ask you about scholarships, about financial aid, about getting my son or daughter to campus, those kind of process questions. But when you can preemptively answer questions that maybe they don't feel comfortable asking about, well, my son or daughter really struggled during online learning the past year from their school. How is the transition going to be to a hybrid model at your institution? So that's something that's a very real challenge that they maybe don't know how to articulate well, but they want to know that you're sensitive enough to that as an institution to respond and act like you and show that you care in the way you conduct your operations. So I think there's a lot of value here with this, with taking your experiences in the past 20 months of the pandemic, showing where the positive stories are that you can tell and how your current students experience that, and then sharing that with your future students, because they want to know that. They want to know that, hey, it was a rough time for everybody, but hey, you as a campus stood up, stepped up, and did what needed to be done to make sure students felt comfortable, felt needed, felt a part of a community when everybody was feeling isolated. So that's valuable for you to share that story. Even though you might think it's just business as usual, it's value that that you want to pay attention to. And I'm sharing an article from ISIF Monitor that is actually a review of QS's latest international student survey that shows that prospective students are right now, because of the pandemic, the economic impact the pandemic has had around the world, that prospective students are most worried about money issues and the ability to receive medical care abroad. And they are wondering about mental health, that maybe they wouldn't feel comfortable asking for supports that are specific to mental health, that they're looking for ways to alleviate their worries and increase their enjoyment of study abroad. So again, that's speaking specifically to what your future students want to know what it's like. They're concerned. They're legitimately concerned about what it's going to be like. Their families may have lost their jobs. Parents may have lost jobs. Fortunes may have been lost. They might not be able to look at them. They might not be able to qualify for your institution in terms of paying for it. So do you have aid available, scholarships or otherwise? So this is data that you need to be using and keeping your finger on the pulse. So please subscribe to the Roundup. Get the podcast at least, so you can at least hear what we're talking about each week. But get these stories through our newsletter that we send out on Mondays, every Monday at 9 a.m. Eastern. We're subscribed to that on our website, smieconsulting.org/subscribe. I'm dropping the link to this week's edition that has some of the stories we're covering. We don't have the IIE data. That'll come in next week's newsletter. But that's certainly something that you should be using. And this ISIF Monitor story about the QS International Student Survey report, that's valuable data you should have. So another piece in that puzzle on communication relates to our third question, and we covered a little bit as an example of what you can be highlighting. But that is, does your campus make international alumni a priority? And I've been on a total of 1 campus out of 5 where I've worked, where they've actually had an international alumni or advancement person designated to work exclusively with those overseas audiences, graduates of your school that now live abroad. And I've been on campuses where they don't even bother to track them. I've been on campuses where that the Advancement Alumni Office hoards that data and won't share because they don't want it to be used for things other than fundraising. So there's territorial battles that go on campus. I get that. A lot of it's politics. But the reality is you can do it right, and you can have a balance between the two, and you can and should be leveraging your international alumni in many parts of your university life, but especially in recruitment. One institution that does it right is, and there's an article I'll be sharing about University of University of Buffalo, and they have had since 2013, I think is his hire date, I just want to make sure, 2013, yep, he was hired as a gentleman named Wei Lun Leong, originally from Malaysia, graduated from University of Buffalo in 2002, I think it was, went on to work for a number of different institutions in China, and then came back to the U.S. He's been at Buffalo since 2013. He is hired as a director of international alumni engagement. And so they have 26,000 international alumni on record, and have what he knows is that they have some famous alumni in there. The current Secretary of the Department of Science and Technology in India, the Minister of Finance and Human Resource Management of the state of Tamil Nadu in India, co-founder of Baidu in China, that's Google in China, and the former Minister of Education in China. So they have 11 alumni chapters around the world. it's his job to keep them all connected with what's going on campus, does fundraising, philanthropic gifts, that type of thing, which you would expect from an institution that has someone working in advancement or alumni. There's always fundraising involved there. That's a kind of usually a different concept for international students, but it's certainly one that is part of his portfolio. And he says he sees himself as a bridge builder, where that they're asking alumni for help, but we're helping them as well. In terms of expanding their job networks, in terms of keeping them in touch with what's going on campus. But he also has a part of his job is helping engage with alumni in the recruitment of future students. And that's a piece that I've been preaching for years should be a part of your puzzle, that you should have alumni stories, international alumni stories that you're sharing through social media, through videos, through communication plans, that they can be a part of how you recruit future students by showing the future students the success of what your students have been able to do with your degree. So one of the great lines I love about this is a newer phenomenon, and the place I worked where they had a designated international advancement or alumni person was he'd been in the job a couple of years when I got there in 2004. So that was at Ball State in Indiana, and we worked with him closely in putting together recruitment plans, met alumni when I was on recruitment trips, and they helped out at fairs and connected future students and parents to them. So very significant roles that they can play. But he has mentioned that he will get, when he reaches out to alumni for the first time, they always ask, what took so long? Because they're eager to be involved and engage with you. And that's something that I think you look to a model, kind of a setup for working with alumni. I think the University of Buffalo has a really good setup there. So congratulations to them, and certainly some great ideas on how alumni can be incorporated into what you do in recruitment. So until next time, again, our next midweek roundup will be Wednesday, December 1st. Wish you all, for my American colleagues, a very happy Thanksgiving, very peaceful Black Friday, and hopefully you all have time to recharge some batteries and get ready for the end of the year push. So until next time, I wish you all the best. Cheers.